President Trump practically daring House Democrats to impeach him and declaring he welcomes a Senate trial, a process that could theoretically get underway by Christmas. Now, we've now heard and seen 12 witnesses testifying publicly at 7 hearings over 5 days. And while everyone is sorting through the testimony, we should note that the most damning evidence came straight from the horses' mouths. Fact: President Trump asked the Ukrainian president to investigate the Bidens. We know this not only because of the rough transcript of the July 25th call that the White House released, but because President Trump admitted it publicly.
Mr. President, what exactly did you hope Zelensky would do about the Bidens after your phone call? Exactly.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer.
A very simple answer indeed. And what was the Trump administration willing to do to secure this investigation into the Bidens? Were they willing to hold off a White House meeting, which President Zelensky desperately wanted to show U.S. support to his public and to Putin? Well, here's U.S. Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland.
I know that members of this committee frequently frame these complicated issues in the form of a simple question: was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes.
Yes, Sondland says, no question, it was a quid pro quo. Hey, Ukraine, you want the White House meeting? You need to announce these investigations. Okay, now what about that $400 million in U.S. aid that Ukraine also desperately wanted? Well, Acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney explained why that aid was held up. He said so on camera. Now, he said he did so, the president, because the president wanted an investigation into Ukraine's role in the 2016 election.
The look back to what happened in 2016 certainly was part of the thing that he was worried about in corruption with that nation. And that is absolutely appropriate.
The funding.
Yeah.
To be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happens as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. And I have news for everybody. Get over it. There's going to be political influence in foreign policy.
So, yes, there was a quid pro quo on the military aid and the other aid, $400 million worth, according to Mulvaney. Now, 2 points on what Mulvaney said there. One, he later tried to unsay what he said. And two, Mulvaney is portraying this as trying to get Ukraine to participate in a Justice Department investigation into 2016. But that is consistently not what President Trump says he wants. President Trump wants a look into a debunked conspiracy theory about Ukraine and the DNC server that U.S. intelligence officials say was hacked by Russia, not by Ukraine. Now, this is just a fraction of the public evidence, though these are facts seldom even acknowledged by the president's defenders.
The facts are on our side. The facts are on the president's side. The truth is on the president's side.
The truth is, the president of the United States, by his own admission, asked a foreign power to launch a major investigation into his political rival, Joe Biden, his son, and into a debunked conspiracy theory. These are investigations that would help President Trump politically. And, according to the president's own aides, the president used a White House meeting and $400 million taxpayer dollars to get Ukraine to do it. Now, you can debate whether or not it's criminal. You can debate whether or not it's impeachable. But you cannot debate whether or not those are the facts. As CNN's Sarah Murray reports, Democrats are preparing to move forward with articles of impeachment.
President Trump says bring it on. He's ready for an impeachment trial in the Senate.
Frankly, I want a trial. The Republican Party has never been more unified.
Republican lawmakers have been working with the White House to prepare for a possible Senate trial, coalescing around the notion that a long, exhaustive process may be the best course to protect the president. But first, the House will have its say. The House Intelligence Committee and 2 other panels are crafting a report to serve as the basis for articles of impeachment. that the House Judiciary Committee will consider after Thanksgiving.
We have to decide what does it mean, and once we conclude our investigation, if we decide that it means that the president should be held accountable.
Democratic sources say a busy December is ahead, filled with public hearings and a likely vote in the House Judiciary Committee, before a full vote to impeach on the House floor, which could come before Christmas Day, potentially making Trump the third president in history to be impeached. House Democrats don't plan to wait for first-hand witnesses who have resisted testifying, like Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and former National Security Advisor John Bolton.
They keep taking it to court, and no, we're not going to wait till the courts decide. That might be information that's available to the Senate, but we can't wait for that because, again, it's a technique. It's obstruction of justice.
Then, in January, the impeachment battle is expected to shift to the Senate, where Trump's fate will collide with 6 Democratic senators looking to unseat him in the next presidential election.
I will be there for the trial.
Do you swear or
But after weeks of hearings and impassioned arguments from Democrats,
this president believes he is above the law, beyond accountability. And in my view, there is nothing more dangerous than an unethical president who believes they are above the law.
Even Republicans who have been critical of Trump don't appear convinced impeachment is the remedy.
An impeachable offense should be compelling, overwhelmingly clear, and unambiguous. I've not heard evidence proving the president committed bribery or extortion.
Now, the White House legal team believes it is 100% in the president's interest to have this public trial in the Senate. Jake, it seems like we will soon find out if they are right.
All right, Sarah Murray, let's discuss with our team here today. Let me start with you, Kirsten, because we heard from one Democratic Congressman, Brad Sherman, today, who said that, in his view, it wouldn't hurt to get more information. So I guess the question is, do you think Democrats have made sufficient case? Should they, I mean, this idea that they're not going to wait for the courts, they're not going to, it would take too long, et cetera, those are not arguments about the substance of the evidence. Those are arguments about timing and politics. Should they keep going?
Well, I mean, first of all, timing and politics do matter. So I think that is something they have to take into consideration. I think that they made a case. For anybody who wants to actually look at the case honestly and take the information honestly, I think they made an absolutely airtight case, you know, that the president has done something that's impeachable. The Republicans don't want to absorb that information. And I actually don't think it would make any difference whether it was John Bolton that was up there or Rudy Giuliani. If they're somehow able to even get these people to testify, there is nothing. I just really can't think of anything that would make the Republicans change their mind, because what has been demonstrated over the last, week is so horrifying and so clear, and that they can still sit there and say, well, it's inappropriate. It's like so far beyond inappropriate. Every argument that they've made has been completely destroyed. So they came out and made all these defenses that one by one were knocked down. They're left with no defenses except to just say, well, it's bad, but it's not impeachable.
So the argument that she's making here is basically that House Republicans and Senate Republicans are just not good faith operators. There's no evidence that's going to convince them, even if President Trump literally were to shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and everybody saw it.
Yeah, that may be true, but I do think there's a gap that gives Republicans, particularly in the Senate, a big opening. If House Democrats want to make the charge of bribery or extortion, however you put it, you need to prove that monetary component that happened with the holding of $400 million in aid. I think the hearings so far have done an excellent job proving that the White House withheld the meeting for those investigations. But if I were sitting in the Senate right now, I think you could make an argument that President Zelensky wasn't necessarily entitled to a White House meeting. He was entitled to those funds. Those were congressionally authorized, but they haven't proven that case directly, primarily because Mick Mulvaney hasn't been made to testify or submit documents. And so I think that's a huge gray area. I don't think even if you prove that, that would necessarily sway Republicans, but in the case that they're making, that is a gap.
What do you make of it all, Jackie? Because Mulvaney did say that the funds were held in part, not entirely, but in part, to push the Ukrainians to announce this investigation into the 2016 election. And he tries to make it seem like it's something reasonable. It's the Justice Department investigation. When we know, President Trump said it this morning, it's about this crazy conspiracy theory that his own former Homeland Security advisor called debunked.
Right. I mean, so I think they're going to have to go forward, should this investigation happen, without 7 witnesses that are, firsthand account, which is one of the things that Republicans were criticizing some of the witnesses we saw over the past week. Mike Pompeo, Vice President Pence, Mick Mulvaney, Sondland listed them all, people who were involved in this whole dual track of foreign policy. It is unlikely we're going to hear from any of them. So you can't really, if you're Nancy Pelosi, you can see why she's pushing this ahead, because it is getting them to testify is out of the realms of possibility.
So, Laura, I spoke with a source close to the White House legal team, and they say they're not convinced that the House is actually even going to vote to impeach. What do you think? What are your sources telling you?
No, I think that what we're hearing so far is that if they are fully done with hearing testimony, and they most likely are, because Pelosi doesn't want to have to wait, and it could take a long time through the courts, then they are going to now push this over to judiciary, which is going to write up the articles. Beyond that, we aren't sure what those articles will include just yet. We haven't been told if they also will include emoluments or things related to the Mueller investigation in those. But it looks as though the very next step that'll come definitely before Christmas is this hits judiciary, and then they move forward.